Welcome to Dynasty Life. I'm Theo Gremminger. Redraft ends, but Dynasty is life. And I'm excited to be joined today by somebody I've never podcasted with one-on-one, Thor Nystrom of Fantasy Pros. And you know Thor, because Thor, this time of year, Thor, this is like your time to shine this time of year. This is very much in NFL draft and rookie draft season. Thor is one of the better evaluators of talent out there when it comes to looking at these college prospects and projecting them as to how they're going to perform for our fantasy teams. Thor is also doing a lot of podcasting with Derek Brown. Derek Brown has been right in this chair on Dynasty Life before. Had Debro on like right after the Senior Bowl. It was a lot of fun. But welcome to Dynasty Life. Thor, let everybody know what you're dropping this time of year and where they can find your work.
Thank you for having me. Debro and I, we have a new NFL draft show on Fantasy Pros. It's on the Dynasty feed, the podcast feed of Fantasy Pros, which we're super excited about. Last episode we just dropped, we had John Middlecoff, the former Eagles scout on. And then we did our flag plant guys at quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, and the whole class. So we sort of round robined it. So that was pretty fun. But check that out. And then, of course, all the NFL draft content. I'm knee deep in it. Right when we get off here, Theo, I'll be turning in my offensive tackle rankings. I've already done the quarterbacks are out, running backs are out. We'll get tackle. Tomorrow, the interior offensive linemen are coming. I think later this week is wide receiver. So now it's, we'll be going bang, 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 bang. But yeah, it's super fun. Check that out on Fantasy Pros.
Is DJ Burns of NC State going to make the offensive line rankings after the big performance in March Madness?
I seen all that stuff about it was a Nagy put that out there that they're interested. So yeah, I mean it's always fun watching. I don't watch as much basketball obviously, but watching for the Rico Gathers and stuff like that. Yeah, it's big time.
It's definitely a lot of fun. But we got our own March Madness. We had tons of diving into a lot of these prospects, but now it's sort of to have a lot of clarity. And I'm glad you guys dropped your flag plants. We're going to talk to Thor about sort of his guys. But before we do that, you're in the chair right here at Dynasty Life. I got to ask you the evergreen questions. We're in April. We're about 6 weeks away from 2024 redraft season. But I got to go back in time. We got to talk about 2023. You guys put a ton of work in on the Dynasty side, on the redraft side. And I can't even begin to think about the amount of hours that go into identifying the guys that you think are going to be productive, the guys you're fading when it comes to redraft and when it comes to Dynasty. But we don't always get things right. Who was your biggest disappointment in 2023? Maybe a guy who had terrible usage from his team or simply didn't perform well. Could be a guy you're bullish on, could be a guy your site was bullish on.
Yeah. So, last year was the first time I had done Fantasy Football Weekly. And so every episode you're, during the season, you're giving out, your grades on different guys and whatnot. And heading into the season, as a company, we were all pretty high in this guy and I was no different. Tony Pollard to me is the biggest disappointment. What, you projected out of him. And then, just seeing the way it happened, right? It wasn't like the disappointment of season-ending injury in week one. It was like this slow burn disappointment where you're just consistently frustrated with him. Well, obviously wasn't as explosive, and now it's the end of his time in Dallas. But yeah, that was disappointing from the fantasy perspective last year.
Follow-up question with Tony Pollard. He's sort of like a forgotten asset. A lot of dynasty managers seem to be washing their hands over him, despite him landing pretty well. It seems like he lands in a situation where they want to use him. And could we take a glass half full view that he was coming off of an injury? This year he'll be healthier in the offseason. Maybe we see that correlate on the field. Or is he a guy that you think is just purgatory guy this year, sort of a split with a younger dynamic back that can also catch the football in Tyjae Spears? Is there a little bit of hope with his situation in Tennessee, or is he just like a whatever guy for you now?
I think Tony Pollard is the second best Tennessee running back that they have who is explosive with durability concerns. Maybe an injury to one or the other is where you really get the bonanza. So, depending on where the price point is, maybe you try to do the double up there.
Yeah.
And not when they're both healthy, but if and when, because one or maybe even both of them is going to get injured at some point next year. But like, if you have this scenario with the one, obviously that offense is going to run a lot. You can't have an offense where you're having Will Levis sit back in the pocket and just chuck the ball around. So they're obviously going to try to lean into the run game. We'll see how effective that is with the state of their offensive line. But I think that's sort of the more viable thing, at least to lead the step of the offense, and then hopefully keep the pass rush at bay. That's the thing where Levis starts to glitch. So, but yeah, I think that's, but like just preferentially for me, I would prefer Tajay Spears if it's one against the other.
I want Tajay on my dynasty teams now. I think it's like a buying opportunity. It was still a disappointing to see Tony Pollard land there. Capping Tajay Spears is like big time, receiving ceiling. I was like disappointed in that one. Certainly a lot of best ball managers were disappointed in that one too, with where Tajay Spears was going. And then with Tennessee, do you see them going offensive tackle, Thor at the 107?
Depending on the scenario, right? Like the one where it is, I think it becomes a free spot on the bingo card is this scenario where it is the Vikings or the Broncos, whatever, trading to 5, right? Because then you take the chart. I made a joke on Twitter of Jim Harbaugh will need to be locked out of the room and chained down so they can consummate the trade down and pass on Joe Alt. But that would be the scenario, I think, where he gets, the offense, Joe Alt gets to them. If Alt's off the board before them, then I think they're going to go to a different position. But if Alt is there at 7, I think that is a real quick card turn in.
Yeah, I think that's probably the most logical one, and what you'd want to see if you're bullish on Will Levis and this Titans offense taking a step forward. Let's talk about biggest positive surprise, a guy that maybe you were bullish on, or maybe your site was bullish on, but certainly exceeded expectations in 2023. And we always tell our guests, can't say Puka Nacua, too easy.
Yeah, well, I'll go with the other rookie receiver that we liked a lot last process, Tank Dell. Another guy that we saw down in Mobile alongside Puka, and a guy that could not be covered down at the Senior Bowl last year. And then he goes into the NFL. And I was pretty bullish on Tank because I had seen that guy rip up everyone that he went up against in college, but including the really good secondaries. Like when they went up against Power 5 teams, Tank Dell would crush them. When they went up against the Cincinnati team that went to the college football playoff that had Sauce Gardner and then the other NFL corner on the other side and then the 2 NFL safeties back there, he ripped them up too. It was like, I've seen this guy lick NFL players over and over again. Like, I'm pretty sure he's just going to keep doing it going forward. And obviously the people that didn't like Tank Dell, they'll be like, well, we weren't wrong about the durability stuff. So that's the one thing we're going to have to see with Tank. And then obviously there was very interesting news right before we got on vis-a-vis the Texan situation and Tank Dell, just a second ago.
Yeah, and I was live on air with Matt Kelly and Alan Sosowski on the Sonic Truth, and I get like the notification on my phone, and we interrupt and we start reacting to it live. But if anybody didn't know the news yet, Stephon Diggs is now a Houston Texan, and then to use kind of best ball, values, Nico Collins is currently the wide receiver 9 on Underdog. Tank Dell is currently the wide receiver 19 on Underdog. Stephon Diggs was being drafted right about in the middle. And obviously, we don't have to go into how successful a fantasy asset Stephon Diggs has been over the years. But Dell and Collins were certainly guys we'd look at as massive dynasty risers. Which of the two takes a bump and loses some value more because of the Stephon Diggs addition?
Big jump out of Diggs, of course, but I think if it's just the 2 Texans guys, I think the bigger drop would be Collins. I think you give a small drop to Dell, but probably a little bit bigger of a one to Collins, because he was going to get all that type of usage. In Tank Dell, you're getting the efficiency and different stuff like that with him. I'm not sure that gets chomped away at to the degree that maybe some of those high leverage down the field type targets may end up getting taken away from Nico to go to the other side with Diggs. But yeah, I still think that Dell ends up getting pounded with targets, but maybe it's we're not sending you down the field because we got 2 guys that can do that.
Yeah, and I'm with you there because I think that Dell, if anything, this is the time to go and send a few trade offers to Dell. because I had your same reaction that I think it hurts Nico Collins, and it's sort of like he's definitely not the alpha. Stephon Diggs, I agree with you, where I'm not like going to go out and overpay for Diggs. I think this sort of caps his target ceiling. The days of Stephon Diggs being a 150 target guy, those are over. I think we're looking more at like a 125, 130 target, and then the other two are going to see their fair share. But Dell certainly projects to have more targets, and Nico Collins, I think, unless he scores a bunch of touchdowns, he's going to take a big hit. And wide receiver 9 is going to correct itself really significantly. How about pivoting over to the quarterback position? We've seen Houston add Joe Mixon in the backfield for cheap. Seemed like a very cagey move. They re-sign Dalton Schultz, who had some success last year, and now they attempt to get Keenan Allen. They miss on Allen, and they go out and they get Stephon Diggs. How set up is CJ Stroud to have a massive year 2? Could we see CJ Stroud as like a top 3 quarterback in fantasy scoring? And where does he fall in line for you now? If Thor Nystrom's in a Dynasty Superflex startup today, how high are you willing to take CJ Stroud?
Of the quarterbacks?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, top 3 for sure. Yeah. And yeah, this, to your point about the offseason acquisitions, it sets him up ideally, right? Like last year he comes in, it's his first year, and there had been the talk during his process that, did the system at Ohio State, did it facilitate some of those windows he was throwing into and different, like he didn't have to, because of the receivers they had and they were so good. But then last year, Houston did not have the best running back room, running game. And then there was the times that the receiver injuries, particularly with Dell, when the guys outside of Nico Collins, that you're putting it together with bubble gum, and he was still excelling really high level. His game obviously translated 1-to-1 and going to the immediately. And now you're going to have the 3 stud receiving core. And then, like you mentioned, we have gotten a big upgrade in the backfield as well. I'm super bullish on Stroud. It just is what it is. Like he's got all the weapons now, so it's about to get fun in Houston.
Yeah, big time. I think it's like sort of one of those things where Alan Soslowski brought up, you're going to start seeing some CJ Stroud going off the board at like the 101 in Superflex startups. I don't think I'm taking him ahead of Josh Allen, but I think I could take him. I could convince myself to take him ahead of everybody else. I think he's going to go absolutely nuts this year. And you brought up like the wide receivers he was excelling with, like Noah Brown.
Yeah.
Noah Brown, every single one of these guys. Nico Collins, what was he before CJ Stroud? He was sort of a dynasty afterthought. So it's very, very exciting times. Great time to be a Houston Texans fan. But let's pivot back over to kind of my evergreen questions. This is a fun one, and I'm getting a lot of different answers. If you could know the final stats of any single player in 2024, who would it be?
Can I do rookie?
You can do rookie and vet. You can do one or the other. There's no rules here on Dynasty Life, Thor. You go take it any way you want.
I would like to know the stats of a couple different running backs. I'm going to toss out Jaylen Wright and Marshawn Lloyd for different reasons, because if I knew Jaylen Wright's final stat line, it would be telling me where he's going and the type of situation he's getting into right away. I know that the teams that he has drawn interest from this process, Dallas has been sniffing around Jaylen Wright heavily. That is the ideal one. We talked about Mr. Tony Pollard before. My comp for Jaylen Wright is Tony Pollard. It's the type of back that they like and they are looking to replace right now. Ideal situation. But then you run the gamut on teams that I have heard are extremely interested in, to the other side where there's a bunch of teams that have their running back room set, but it's like a guy who's on the last year of his contract. So but some of those teams are sniffing around him heavily. And so but if he gets into that situation, then next year, you wouldn't have the fantasy utility. And with regards to Lloyd, I think knowing his stat line next year, basically then I could accurately rank him in my rankings. I rank, we were talking about Debro before. Debro absolutely is over the moon in love with Marshawn Lloyd. The guy won't shut up about Marshawn Lloyd, and he says Debro is RB1. And it's hard for me to argue with any of his points because I see all those different things. And in fact, what I put in my write-up is absolutely would not be a surprise in a decade if we look back and Marshawn Lloyd was clearly the best running back from this class. And it would equally not be a surprise if in a decade we look back and Marshawn Lloyd was not amongst the top 10 running backs in this class in rushing yards at that point. I'm ranking him RB4 in my rankings, not as I know the future with this guy and I have a conviction outright. I'm just stating it. I am splitting the baby with his where I'm putting him, where it's both nodding at that downside and the risk in his profile, and then also the upside. But I would love to know what his year one stat line is, because if it's a good one, I think he's also going to have it's going to be closer to the potential RB1 from this class at the end of the day.
I love it, and we're going to dive into a number of these rookie running backs. We're going to talk to Thor about Thor's guys. We're going to talk to Thor about the top of the wide receiver class. We're going to dive into a number of topics that are going to help you win your rookie drafts and get you ready to dominate your Dynasty League this year.
This episode is brought to you by Player Profiler, the Dynasty Deluxe package. The rankings are the best in the industry. It includes strategy mode where you can say, hey, change the rankings to be win now. Oh, change the rankings to be productive struggle. There's also a draft planner to help to strategize where you should take players because the draft planner also includes ADP. There's a trade finder where we look up on My Fantasy League and we see trades that are done, including a particular player. Then there's a trade analyzer where you can plug in draft picks, players, and we assign a lifetime value to draft picks out 5 years. The best thing about our trade analyzer, it can't be gamed with volume. And there's mock draft data to see right now what's the market for player X versus player Y, including in the fall when very few mock drafts are happening. And our Dynasty Guide, the Dynasty Dominator, would cost you $10 on Amazon, but you get it for free with Dynasty Deluxe, and you get our Rookie Guide for free, a $25 value. So you get all of that for $45. I mean, it's a great deal.
Welcome back to Dynasty Life. I'm Theo Gremminger, joined by Thor Nystrom. Thor, we talked a little bit about Marshawn Lloyd and Jaylen Wright as two guys you'd love to know their final stats. I think those are great answers, and that's actually the first time I've heard those two mentioned in that question. A lot of times I get quarterbacks, but let's stick to the running back position. You talked about Jaylen Wright to the Dallas Cowboys. I think the low-hanging fruit is Dallas and maybe the Chargers. Those are the two teams that people love saying if a rookie goes there, that's a great, there's a clear path and all that. Who are some other teams where you would get a little bit excited about a player like Jaylen Wright landing on?
Well, I'll tell you one where I don't. I can tell you the Steelers are interested in him too. That's one example of a team where it's like, I don't want that to be the landing spot.
That sounds gross. Super gross.
It's super gross. Yeah. Dallas, like you mentioned, would be the home run one. I don't know that he fits the profile of Jim Harbaugh, and I haven't heard of, in specific regards to him, although sometimes teams don't telegraph that with different stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, Dallas is very clearly number one. Another one, this is more or less selfish. The Vikings signed Aaron Jones to a 1-year deal after he had gotten released. A part of the deal was you don't have to give up the comp pick once you sign a guy after he'd been released. I'm pretty confident in saying I think Aaron Jones' stop in Minnesota is going to be 1 year. You get him with the 1-year cheap deal, and then when he leaves you, then you're back in the game for potential compensation. If he signs for enough. That would be an example of one where Jaylen Wright could go to where it's like in year one, maybe it's, he's more he's the Tajay to Derrick Henry from last year, but that you would at least get some looks, and then you'd see the skill set, and then next 2025 is when he would potentially then be, if they take any running back who in this position, where then they would be stepping into the starting running back role of a team who has one of the best sets of tackles in the league, has the best receiver in the league, a very, very good wide receiver too, stud tight end. And hopefully we'll have to see if they hit on the quarterback like the Texans did last year with Stroud. then everything is in place in a Kevin O'Connell offense. So the running back in that, if you had that guy long-term, would be enormous dynasty value. So that would be another one I'd toss out of like, sort of like what would be perceived as like it's like Steelers are the worst case scenario. Cowboys are the best case scenario, but like more of a perceptually like middle case outcome where I think that there would be way more dynasty value there than maybe on the surface initially that people would react.
No, I love it. And the idea of Jaylen Wright, the sort of home run hitter in that level of an offense. I mean, you're talking about a guy who could give us multiple RB1 seasons if it all lands correctly. It's sort of like the sliding doors thing here, because I think, like you bring up, certain teams might view him as a very good committee back with like big playability. Certain teams are going to view him as a guy who can kind of handle the load, but he's definitely one of the more exciting running backs in this class. Let's talk a little bit about one that I think people are a little less confused on. It's sort of clear. Trey Benson had an unbelievable combine. This is a guy who runs a 4.39 40. The speed score is there. Athletic measurables kind of compare to like a Ken Walker, a Breece Hall, sort of what we saw from them at the combine. Is Trey Benson now your RB1 in this class, Thor, and sort of your expectations for Benson heading into his NFL career?
Yeah, so Debra argues at me about Marshawn Lloyd, and the entire time I've been arguing back at him about Benson. Benson's been my RB1 like from the get, and then locked that thing in with the combine showing. Then it was, we got a bullet next to that RB1. In the same way, it was Jaylen Wright was my RB2 heading in, and then he got the bullet based on what he done at the combine. But I really like Trey Benson's game. I think he gets nitpicked sometimes. Early in the career at Oregon, first year he doesn't get on the field, and then he suffers the injury, which then wiped out most of his second season. But he transfers to Florida State, and then in that third, his what would have been his true junior year, or I guess technically redshirt sophomore, he breaks the PFF charting record for force missed tackle rate. Was the first guy ever that they had charted over 50% in that over a season. And then you get the explosion as well with him. So then you get that he's able to get himself out into the second level, and then it's watch out. If he gets out into the open field, that's where you got a problem. And he converts the speed to power as well. So it's not just I have to erase the angles. It's if you confront that guy in the open field, get ready, because he's going to turn into the battering ram, and then you're about to get run over. So I like that stuff. I like his receiving, the pass, and total pass game utility. He is a good receiver. Mike Norvell's system, people that remember him going back to Memphis. You had the Antonio Gibson, you had Tony Pollard, the aforementioned Tony Pollard, the multi sort of dimensional skill sets of guys that Norvell had. He would use them in this way where he would move them around the formation, then chuck it to him on the outside and set up the blocking for him. Trey Benson got that treatment from Norvell, where it was like, all right, now we're going to motion you out into the slot. And then the quarterback does the thing, turn around. Benson takes a couple steps back, do the screen, and now we start running. I also like the play action stuff. He has a really good feel for selling it, running up to the line, and then like picking his way around the garbage and then getting out into his route really quickly, make yourself available to the quarterback. It's one of those things that's like, it's super subtle, but like guys that can't do that, they're really hard to trust at the next level in those concepts as receivers. The quarterback's just not going to use them as often. Benson going to give you that. And then I think also importantly, he is a good pass blocker. So he's a guy, assuming the health is there, he just had that one, big injury back at Oregon, but he has proven since the athletic profile with the play the last couple of years, he's beyond that, stays healthy in the NFL. That is a 3-down dude who is going to help you as a runner, obviously, and then the passing game utility.
I think you nailed it with the 3 downs, where we like those sort of guys are kind of like unicorns, where there's less and less guys that get the 3-down work, so much running back by committee players. But Benson, I mean, it's not a guarantee he's going to get there, but I think he's certainly got a shot. And we don't really have a whole lot of questions about the draft capital, unless there's something weird with teams worried about the past health stuff at Oregon, which I think that ship has sailed. Then I think he'll be a late second rounder, early third rounder. So definitely rooting for him. Let's talk about 2 names. And it's funny, Thor, a lot of times you see fantasy people talking about the sort of the sleeper running backs, and then they sort of become in like the vernacular of like big NFL draft people. You're starting to see Mel Kiper and guys like him mentioning Kimani Vidal.
Ugh.
And this has been a guy that you've been really big on. You were on the Sonic Truth podcast with us. We did a mock draft with everybody from Fantasy Pros. We had Debro, Pat Fitzmaurice with Cody Carpentier, Alan Sosowski, and myself. And I believe you mentioned Kimani Vidal is your RB5 in this class. 1,600 yards last year at Troy, plus 110 on the speed score. Tell us the things you love about him.
He reminds me a lot of Jaylen Warren, which I was fortunate enough to get the opportunity to ask Kimani on the field in Mobile at the Senior Bowl what he thought of that comp, amongst other things. But he was a bell cow of the Troy offense going back several years. He got on the field right away. So he was a 4-year contributor. And then the past couple of years in particular became true bell cow. So you look at his size and it's like, could he handle that work? We know he can handle the workload. He's a eyelash under 5'8", 213. But both, and by the way, running between the tackles too, which is arguably his best thing as a runner. He has a good vision with it. He doesn't have like the joystick agility, I would say. Like Corum is the bowling ball build guy who has the better side-to-side agility, like making, like the Matador. But Vidal, it's more the subtle thing off the one cut where he can make one dude miss, and or the thing you see way more regularly is he is able to change the launch angle point, the contact point, right before the other dude leaves his feet. So like right leading up to that point, he can subtly change sort of the angle and his movement. Now the guy, it's an off angle attempt or an arm angle attempt coming in. He runs through those. He's like a little bullet. He has this straight ahead ethos, and it wasn't just ripping up bad teams. I asked him about this on the field as well. One of the more impressive things about his tape was when they went up against some of the better teams against Kansas State. Kansas State started stacking the box. They were like, we're not letting this kid, just the entire game. And he was breaking long runs against 8-man boxes because, he can just shoot right through there. It's hard to see him behind the line, and then, just because of the acceleration. And then I thought the thing that was slept on with him coming into the process was on the film, I saw the better speed. If you looked, around, people were like, oh, he's 4.6, he's not fast. And it was like, I don't know. I've seen him running away from Power 5 defenders. Like it seems at least decent speed to my untrained eye. And it turned out, he put out the athletic profile that you mentioned, but he 90th percentile athleticism or close to it, 4,000 career rushing yards in the FBS, arguably the best pass blocking back in this class as well, which I think is, it's something that as dynasty people, we don't talk as much from the fantasy perspective, but it's the thing that keeps you on the field, right? Kimani Vidal actually has a 3-down utility, because I don't think his NFL team will be able to take him off the field when they need the pass blocker back there. He's going to enter the NFL and be one of the better pass blocking backs from the get. And the way that manifested was really interesting because, we talked about this, about how he was mentioning the one thing he wanted to show evaluators at the Senior Bowl was I can catch and I'm a good receiver. It's just the way that our offense was constituted. It was like, hand me the ball, hand me the ball, hand me the ball. And then when they would go and pass, that was like his break, which was now go and pass block, right? He was around 20 catches per season, all 4 of those years, but he never got to have the dynamic usage as the receiver. It was more the dump offs or the outlets, and they held that running back a bunch to pass block, perhaps even because Kimani was so good at it, developed into being so good. And people are probably, who haven't watched his tape, are like, well, how is this dude who's super small the best pass blocking back in this class? Because this dude understands leverage is how. He runs low to the ground, so it's even a lower, surface area for defenders to hit. And then, like I mentioned, the hiding behind the offensive lineman. But the same low man wins leverage ethos that he has with that is readily apparent in his pass blocking. and he'll go down there. He's got the big base, and then he'll just fire at your hips. He's going to hit you. You know, the oncoming linebackers, the free rushers, does not mind scrapping whatsoever. He is going to be that roadblock, and there is going to be a big collision, and he wiped a bunch of people out. I think they probably thought, oh, I'm going to run this guy over like a turnstile. They didn't realize it until the last second. Like this guy knows what he's doing. And then they get their lower half chopped out from under him, flip over them, or just get stonewalled into the ground right there, upend them. So you have that stuff. You have the rushing utility. Like I said, for me, it's a Jaylen Warren type thing. Jaylen Warren, a guy, his last year at Oklahoma State, number 2 in the FBS in forced missed tackle in the aggregate. Last year, Kimani Vidal, number 2 in the FBS in forced missed tackles. I think there's a lot of similarities with those guys.
Yeah, and unlike Warren, I think Vidal's going to get drafted, which is half the battle. You know, we don't like seeing, you know, kind of our favorite guys go undrafted. But one guy that I want to get your quick thoughts on that's sort of steaming up a little bit. I know Matty Keenum and Cody Carpentier are on him. Scott Connor is talking about him recently. And one guy I've been diving into a little bit myself, and I had to adjust my rankings on him, is Tyrone Tracy. It seems like NFL teams are getting more and more interested in him. Converted wide receiver, sort of an interesting path. He's an older back, but super athletic.
Yeah, so Tracy, you know, you mentioned the ranking, you know, that I had said about Vidal on the other show. Vidal, I brought down one notch in the interim when I put out my rankings. And the reason why is because I watched more of Tyrone Tracy's film from last year at Purdue, and I had to make room for him up above there on my running back board. It was extremely impressive, especially if you know the context of Tyrone Tracy. So Tyrone Tracy was the receiver at Iowa the first 4 years of his career. I went to grad school at Iowa. I'm a diehard Hawkeye guy. So I'm subjected to all their games, their offensive football. And, you know, as everybody knows, they do not pass the ball well. They rarely score. And so Tracy felt both like I'm not being used enough, but I also maybe am not being developed properly here. The Iowa coaching staff was trying to convince him to try out running back because they saw it, right? Like the athletic profile with the gifts that he has, the athleticism that he proved in Indianapolis. And the thing with him at receiver, you always saw the athleticism. I put out a tweet right after, I think it was the 2021 draft when Amir Smith-Marset went in round 5, and the other Iowa receiver that year, Brandon Smith, got top 10 or 15 UDFA money, that Tyrone Tracy was a better prospect than either of those two guys because I was so bullish on that athletic profile. I had seen that guy Houdini himself out of situations where everyone's dead to rights, and all of a sudden he'd somehow find his way out of it, and then the speed thing. And it's like, oh, he gone now. But so like what you saw with the running back film, way better feel than he had any business having as a guy who was new to that position. And he accrued explosive runs at a ludicrous rate for a guy not only new to the position, but also on this dead-end Purdue team that had this new coaching staff. They had a risk-averse offense. They weren't throwing down the field. Their offensive line wasn't terribly good, and they were playing all these good defenses. The rest of the team stunk, except for Tyrone Tracy. It turns out they did not give him the ball nearly enough. They had this other kid, Devin Mockabee, who I believe that the coaching staff, like I mentioned, they're a new coaching staff. I think they wanted to keep Devin Mockabee there, whereas they knew that this was Tracy's last year. And so that's why the usage ended up being closer to even. But Tyrone Tracy, objectively, by any of the numbers, not only blew out Mockabee, but blew out a lot of the other running backs, you know, in this draft class. The yards after contact, he broke a bunch of tackles. The feel thing, he's a wide base slasher who has good vision, better vision than I expected. Like I said, can make you miss. And he has this sense for cutback lanes as well. He frees himself into open space. It's just like he's one of those dudes who has the intuitive feel for it. So I just think of him as sort of like a juiced up slasher. We didn't get to see as much of the receiving utility last year because when I watched it, you know, his cut ups to that, and it was, I talked with Debro about this. Like, it was so stupid. Like, there was only 2 different kinds of ways they threw him the ball. One was they had this concept, and I don't know why they kept doing it. Like I said, risk averse. They would fake a handoff. They'd have 2 guys in the backfield, fake a handoff one way, and then Tracy would be running out the other way. and they just the quarterback would turn and then throw in the ball. I saw that thing over and over again on his receiving cutups. The defense always knew it was coming. It was a straightforward concept. There was always flowing defenders there even before the ball got there, so he'd never have any room to run. The other one was when he was a tertiary dump off when the quarterback was under duress. They didn't use him in an interesting way there. I think his NFL team, you can unlock more of that aspect of his game. Obviously, as a former receiver, he has good hands, knows what he's doing. He's going to have to learn the routes. He just didn't get to run those at Purdue as the running back. But I think that, like I said, that you can project in terms of that. But the running stuff, you don't have to. That is on film. And I just think he was being slept on heading into the process. But yeah, Tyrone Tracy is now running back 5 on my board. So I'm just, and I compare him to Miles Sanders. I think there's a lot of similarities there, the frames and the athleticism, and then sort of that slashing type ethos, and then the receiving utility with it.
You can walk away from your rookie drafts with Tracy or Vidal or both in a lot of leagues. And I think that's a huge takeaway. RB5 for Thor is now Tyrone Tracy. Guy's a rocket ship right now. Let's pivot over. Well, one last question. We've seen now 10 straight years of a rookie finishing as an RB2 or better. I believe RB20 or better. If you had to bet without knowing the landing spot on which running back in this class gives us running back 2 value next year, who would it be?
I'm going to go Trey Benson unless Blake Corum gets drafted by the Chargers.
There we go. Trey Benson, Blake Corum. Let's pivot over to the wide receiver position. One wide receiver that I think a lot of people are super bullish on, but you are certainly in that category, is Ladd McConkey. Ladd McConkey had a tremendous Senior Bowl, a tremendous combine. You're seeing a lot more Ladd McConkey in the first round of the NFL draft. I would bet on him being drafted in the first round with his sort of ascension and his athletic profile. Very similar athletic profile to Garrett Wilson. This is a guy that can do a lot of things, very versatile at Georgia, surrounded by some just stud teammates. What's your sort of NFL ceiling, NFL comp? Take it any way you want and sell people on Ladd McConkey.
Yeah, so Ladd is my wide receiver 5. I will have a first-round grade on him. And I agree with you. He is well in play to go at the end of the first round. If he doesn't, he will not have to wait long on Friday night to hear his name called. So, I mean, it's one or the other. His band of outcomes as far as the draft goes, it's very small because it's either going to be at the end of the first round, it's going to be very early round 2. But yeah, like I said, wide receiver 5 for me. I have toggled back and forth on my comp for him. My comp is Doug Baldwin now. I think I think he's a dude that can play on the outside. Certainly that's what he did at Georgia and excelled. I think it was last year, the splits, what was it? 78.7% on the outside, 21.3% in the slot. And for people out there, Georgia runs the 2 tight end offense. Before it was Darnell Washington and then Bowers, and then last year it was Bowers and Oscar Delp or whatever. But because of that, of course, your 2 boundary receivers, they're on the perimeter. So he has plenty of experience with that. Let's say this was last year, right? And the Vikings are picking and they need the receiver. What ended up being Addison, but that's a 12 personnel offense. McConkey could absolutely go into one of those and be a fine boundary receiver going forward. I also think in a 3 wide receiver set, you can do the thing of moving them inside, outside, where it's like sort of mix and match, slot boundary. He can do both. And he creates separation as easily as you and I breathe air deployed out of either spot on the field. By the numbers, last year, receiving grade percentile against single coverage, Ladd McConkey was 98th, separation percentile 93rd, separation percentile against single coverage 91st. There are he might be the only dude. Oh no, there's one other dude, but one of 2 guys in this class who was 90th percentile or above in all 3 of those different things. He was licking people down there in Mobile at the Senior Bowl this year. He was basically the Tank Dell of the one-on-ones from this year. It was a little bit different. Tank Dell last year, the first day he destroyed everybody on the Tuesday in the one-on-ones. So on the Wednesday, the defenders started grabbing Tank Dell when at the route breaks in the one-on-ones. And they have the fake refs out there that rarely throw flags for the one-on-one drills because they're only sort of out there for show. And if it's egregious, But the defenders started getting egregious with Tank Dell because they're like, you embarrassed me yesterday, and I don't want my draft stock stuff rig anymore. So I'm just gonna clamp onto you here at the route break. So it became comical. And then this year with Ladd McConkey, it was the same thing of the Tuesdays destroying everybody. And then on Wednesday, they did something a little bit different with him. But the defender started playing 8 yards or so off the line in the one-on-one. So no one wanted to press Ladd McConkey anymore. It's like, okay, we know that we can't get him off the line. We need to give ourselves some cushion here, and we're happy to give the free completion within the first 5 yards of the line of scrimmage because they didn't want to get embarrassed by him again. So, like, to me, that's like the telling thing of some of these all-star events is which players change the behavior of everyone else on the other side. Last year it was Dell. This year it was McConkey. I'm very bullish.
Yeah. No, and it's interesting because you mentioned Ladd McConkey's wide receiver 5 for you. We all know who the top 3 are. Who's your wide receiver 4 right now?
Thomas.
Okay, so Brian Thomas, wide receiver 4. So Ladd McConkey, wide receiver 5. That means a couple guys are getting pushed down just a little bit. And usually when we start seeing guys getting pushed down that are going to get sort of significant NFL draft capital, we sort of start looking at the fantasy bust term being thrown out there. Who's a wide receiver that maybe some people are bullish on that you think could be a bust, and certainly a player that you're going to be avoiding in your rookie drafts?
Easy one for me on this one is AD Mitchell from Texas. I sort of rank him obnoxiously low, but that's just how I see him. I rank him wide receiver 14.
Okay.
My comp for him is DJ Shark. And I think the difference between how I see AD Mitchell and then like the AD Mitchell fans out there is they're projecting stuff in his evaluation that we haven't seen yet. The one thing that I think that we have seen that I know will project to the NFL, it's the field stretching thing. In the same way of like a DJ Shark when he came out of LSU. But AD Mitchell is so inconsistent, and you never see him separating on the intermediate routes, which is the reason why you look at Xavier Worthy's targets and then even Jatavian Sanders' targets, and then you compare him with AD Mitchell's. That's the reason why when the production profile that AD Mitchell put out, there was like 3 games where he just blew up, and then in a bunch of other ones, the production wasn't there. And then a couple of them, he outright disappeared. Well, that's why, because that guy needs to hit dingers to put points up on the board. He's not an efficiency guy because he doesn't create separation in the intermediate route range, both because a lack of agility, he telegraphs it. And I also don't love it. I don't feel like he has feel for the route running with that. He doesn't like alter his tempo. He telegraphs where the break's coming and where he's going with that, in part because he labors to change directions. So he has all kinds of company, unless it's down the field and he can just use the athletic trump card on someone. He's going to force defenses to keep a second safety back, on his side of the field. I think that's most of his utility in the NFL, the occasional long ball. But as far as a dynasty or fantasy guy, I want no part of AD Mitchell, especially at the price point that he is at.
AD Mitchell, wide receiver 14 for Thor Nystrom. Wide receiver 5, receiver 6 for some people. There's going to be like a rubber meets the road moment. He's certainly one with a lot of polarizing opinions. Ricky Pearsall, this is a guy that's steaming up, and you're also bullish on him. A little bit older. This was an Arizona State transfer to Florida, put up ridiculous combine testing numbers. Like, he looked athletic, but not this athletic. This was kind of crazy. I think he's kind of locked up day 2. But just how high of a fantasy ceiling do you see for Ricky Pearsall?
Yeah, there's like this concept in like courtroom arguments. It's also sort of a concept with storytelling, which is like the concept of like closing all the doors, right? And that is what Ricky Pearsall did during the pre-draft process. Every doubt that there was about him or every question about it, he slammed the door shut. And so now it's like, well, what questions are there? To me, the floor is extremely high, and it has a solid ceiling as well. Pearsall is number 6 for me on my receiver board, so one spot behind Ladd McConkey. It wasn't a surprise that he did well at the Senior Bowl. I mean, this is a guy who has been a wide receiver for years and years and years, over 2 programs, for a multitude of different quarterbacks and different kinds of quarterbacks. Jaden Daniels back at Arizona State, Anthony Richardson of Florida, Graham Mertz. And then, so, he's always been the top guy with his college teams. Then he goes to Mobile, was awesome down there. And then, but what surprised me was how well he tested when he went to the NFL Combine. I didn't see him testing as a 99th percentile athlete, size adjusted. I didn't see that one coming. 4.41. The agility scores were insane. A 42-inch vertical. Yeah. Like it was like, holy F. But as far as the game film, yeah, that was the thing that you go in being bullish on. First of all, arguably the best set of hands in this class. You put it within his frame, he's catching the ball. It's just, there's no doubt about it. And then he has arguably the best, well, not even arguably, he has the best highlight reel catches in this class.
The best catch of all time.
The Charlotte one is probably the best catch I've seen in college, maybe of my lifetime. Was like stupid. He has some gravity defying ones, the one-handed catches, and then he'll take the shot. He don't care. He's coming down with that ball. He spears the ball outside of his frame when he's on the move without losing momentum. It's like another one of those subtle things, but it's like in the NFL, that's a skill that plays way up because of the yak yardage, the ball placement of the quarterbacks. You hit him on the hands, you don't slow it down at all, turn the corner. That's the kind of Ricky Pearsall guy as well. He has the versatility to play slot and the boundary. He did it throughout his collegiate career. When I talked to him in Mobile, Pearsall told me that the NFL had been talking to him predominantly at that point as a slot, is what they have been discussing with. I wonder if that changed at all in Indianapolis. I think if nothing else, he has the ability to do the same thing at the NFL level in terms of the way he was deployed as he did at college, where you can essentially split his snaps between the inside and the outside, and you can sort of use him interchangeably. I just really like his game. I think he's going to be a high volume dude at the next level. And he certainly has the explosion, can get deep. And like I said, the hands are ludicrous. So you just chuck it up to that guy. He's coming down with it.
Second round pick NFL draft, do you think?
For sure. For sure. Yeah, he will for sure. And I think in the top half of the second round.
Cody Carpentier is penciling him in as a Pittsburgh Steeler. I kind of like that one. That would be a nice landing spot. I like that.
For sure.
One last wide receiver to kind of touch on, one that is kind of going under the radar is Luke McCaffery, Christian McCaffrey's brother out of Rice. Interesting player, Thor.
Yeah, he sure is. 6'2", 198 and 96 percentile athlete. And a guy who early, he comes out of high school, ballyhooed recruit, dual threat quarterback. My brother's Christian, my dad's Ed, the whole thing. But he failed. He failed over and over again as a quarterback. And then he had to transfer to another school. He got beat out right away in like spring ball. And then he has to transfer again. Goes down to Rice. And that was when he had his come to Jesus of like, I'm going to give up the quarterback dream. Moves out to wide receiver. And the last 2 years, he dominated. And he's a guy who can win at all three levels of the field. I think one thing that gets slept on him is his ability to win down the field. And I'm not sure if that was because people doubted the athletic profile or what, but it's all over his tape. And the thing that's most impressive, or the thing where you can project that thing is going to hold to the next level, both the athletic profile that he just put up, but his ability, the concentration is ridiculous. He leads this class by far and might have more of this than all the rest of this class combined in catches secured with his helmet popping off. He's another guy that will take the enormous shot. You always saw it as film, his helmet would pop off, and then he's getting up, but he doesn't have his helmet on, which might be a Rice equipment issue as well. I'm not really sure, but super duper tough kid. And again, catches the ball in traffic all the time. Rice would force targets at him. JT Daniels is down there, would try to just fit it between two dudes. And when he could, McCaffrey he's seeing that thing in the tracking. And then again, the concentration. No, I'm about to get blasted and I'm going to come down with the ball anyway. I love all that different stuff. Last season, 17 for 28 in contested situations. Very good hands, only 3 drops on 120 targets last year. And again, folks, keep in mind, this dude's only been playing wide receiver for 2 years. He's got the athletic profile and he has bloodlines. So I think he was getting slept on before, but now it's starting to rise and it makes sense as to why.
I got him super, super late in a dynasty startup that I'm currently in right now. Definitely interested in him. You got to think, where would his path have been if he would have converted to wide receiver well earlier in his career? Certainly would have had a little more buzz, I think, right now. Definitely an interesting one. But when we look at this class, it comes down to the big three. I mean, there's certainly a lot of guys behind, you mentioned Ladd McConkey, Brian Thomas, Ricky Pearsall, and there's a number of others. But this is about as hyped and about as talented a big three as maybe we've ever seen. Just how good. Look, first of all, why don't you rank them? Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, Rome Odunze. How are you ranking the big three right now, Thor?
In exactly the order that you just said.
Okay, so when we put a little context to it, Malik Neighbors, I think that the market moved pretty quickly. Like, everybody's got him in their wide receiver 1 dynasty, like he's top 12, and everybody's like overall dynasty rankings. People understand what a premium asset Malik Neighbors is for their dynasty teams. And I think maybe over the last month, you've seen that sort of ascension for Rome Odunze. Runs a 4.45 at the combine, huge, incredibly productive, track background, like really hard to poke holes in his game. How good, like, let's put a little context to this. Rome Odunze or any wide receiver in 2023?
Odunze.
Odunze,
sure.
Easy. Here's an interesting one. 2022, we saw Drake London and Garrett Wilson both drafted inside the top 10. At this point, Rome Odunze, heading into the NFL draft, or those two heading into the NFL draft?
Where I will have him graded against, say, London. And I think London was my wide receiver 1 in that class. Odunze above him heading in.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that he's just a cleaner prospect than both of them. How about taking it back one more year? I will take Jamar Chase over Odunze, but then we go down the list. Jaylen Waddle and Devonta Smith. Both of those guys also drafted very highly, Alabama wide receivers. Odunze seems like despite the production of Devonta Smith and the speed of Jaylen Waddle, I think Odunze seems like a better prospect. Where are you at on that one?
Yeah, I probably, if I was stacking those top Chase and Waddle and of my grades of the time, and then Odunze Neighbors, I probably would have had Chase ever so slightly ahead of Neighbors, but we're talking
neck and neck.
Yeah, neck and neck. And then probably Odunze over Waddle. But I mean, they're so different. It's like, really for the NFL team that was making the decision at the time, it would be choose your flavor on that. But in terms of qualitatively overall, very similar grades on those two guys as well. So the second and third guy in this class are comparable to the top two, I think, again, qualitatively in 2021 of that stacked receiver class. I think it gives pretty good context as to how good this receiver class is, particularly at the top, because we haven't even mentioned Marvin Harrison. He's obviously better than those guys. Yeah.
It's like the guy you don't even need to talk about. People poking holes in Marvin Harrison Jr. right now, and it's just, be happy with what you get. If you get a chance to draft Marvin Harrison Jr., draft him. Just quickly on Marvin Harrison Jr., because we're doing some NFL comparisons at Player Profiler, and with Marvin Harrison Jr., I see some AJ Green, some Julio Jones. Is there somebody that stands out to you? You've been doing this a long time, Thor. That is a great NFL comparison for someone as talented as Marvin Harrison Jr.
Yeah, AJ Green, I think is the most popular one, and I wish I could be more creative, but it just works so well.
Yeah, it works. Yeah, why get cute? When it comes to like the upper alphas, like the true alphas, just pick your favorite alpha, and Marvin Harrison Jr. can be that. Quick before I get you out of here, I wanted to dive into your sleeper tight end and a couple quarterback questions, but we're nearing an hour here. You've been very generous with your time. How bullish are you on JJ McCarthy right now, Thor? Because he's a guy that I think a lot of super flex managers, like, he makes that 108 super valuable, but he might go higher than that after the NFL draft.
Yeah, I love JJ McCarthy. He's been, at the start of the process was my QB3. I think when my ranking updates come out, whenever we do before the draft, he's going to end as my quarterback 2. You have the athleticism, you have the proven 6th best 3 cone time at the NFL Combine when he weighed in 17 pounds heavier than his Michigan bio. have the arm strength. That is proven as well. 61 mile per hour max velo throw is one beneath the NFL combine record. And then the most important thing for his projection going forward and what makes him really exciting to the next level is those two things work in conjunction with one another on the field. He's not one of those guys who has a big arm and is a good athlete, but like can't throw on the run. He's the opposite. Joe Milton would be an example of that, right? Or even in some ways, Michael Penix. Penix has the great arm, and Penix is a really solid athlete, as he showed, surprised some people with his testing. But Penix, when you move him off his spot, the more you move him off his spot, the more Penix's accuracy begins to plummet. McCarthy is just as accurate on the move as he is in clean pockets with his feet set, which is absurd. Last year, it was 72% and change completions, and the aggregate 71% and change completions while scrambling. Again, that's pretty unheard of, particularly against the strength of schedule that Michigan was playing. These were not cupcakes. They played the number 38 defensive strength on average, was easily the best of any of that these quarterbacks faced. To give one example, Bo Nix in Oregon faced the average 80th ranked defensive strength. And then the other thing with McCarthy, the narrative was just inverted on him heading into this process where people wanted to focus on his box score stats without bringing up, or, I don't think that the people that were making this argument had looked deep enough into it to have this context. The reason that JJ McCarthy did not throw for over 3,000 yards last year is he missed multiple games. Not because of injury, but because they would yank him out in the second half when they were flogging people. Michigan had 21-plus point leads in 11 of 15 games last year, which led to JJ McCarthy taking 0 fourth-quarter snaps in 7 of 15 games. And some of those games he was taken out before then. So in the aggregate, he lost 2+ games to just, we are beating the ever-loving, out of team so much that we, we're going to put in this kid, their backup kid that's going to be starting this year. I'll butcher the pronunciation of his name, so I'm not even going to try. But the other thing I mentioned about McCarthy, in terms of the pocket game, a nuance of his film is college. This is basically close to unheard of. And even at the NFL, this is a rare trait. You see with quarterbacks, like if you start to Zapruder film, like right when they're throwing under pressure, you will notice, and this goes for NFL quarterbacks as well, way more than half of them do have this quirk where they do something to brace for the hit that is coming or fade away from it, or there's something that they do so they don't have to take the full brunt of that shot, or their lead step is not as pronounced, so they're not stepping as much into the throw. Some way to protect themselves from the shot they know that they're about to take. So rare to see a quarterback who every single time will take that full step and the full extension into the throw when the guy's bearing down is about to hit him in the chin. That's JJ McCarthy. Again, just think through in the NFL, it's just so rare. It's like a Brett Favre would be an example of another guy that was like this, but like I said, you slow down that film, most quarterbacks are going to do something to in some way brace for it. But because of that, that's why JJ McCarthy's numbers are so good under pressure, because it's another thing where his accuracy and arm talent, it doesn't depreciate at all under that because he's willing to take the shot. There is no effect whatsoever on his mechanics when he is about to get blasted because he's not doing anything to modify them. And he doesn't panic either. So just a lot of things to like about him. Obviously, his coach from last year when he won the national title as a 20-year-old, now the Chargers head coach believes he should be the first overall pick. I can't go that far, but second or third overall pick, I would be totally comfortable taking JJ McCarthy in the top 3.
Yeah, you talk about how he got yanked out of all these games this year. I think that's an interesting take. And I think when we go back to a game environment where Michigan trailed, we go back to that TCU game, and McCarthy had 350 passing yards, 50 rushing yards, 3 touchdowns. So he has shown it, just didn't really have to show it. Definitely interesting to see his ascension, and a lot of smart people are on JJ McCarthy right now. Final question for you. Caleb Williams is entering arguably the best situation weapons-wise that we've ever seen for a number 1 pick. He gets Keenan Allen, DJ Moore, Cole Kmet. They signed DeAndre Swift, and they still have the 9th pick as well. They could either improve the offensive line or they could take another receiver. They could take Rome Odunze. Where do you see Caleb Williams finishing in fantasy this season? Not talking dynasty necessarily, but a redraft question. How bullish should people be on Caleb Williams right now in best ball and in, like, we're almost at redraft season?
Yeah, I would go around like 10, like somewhere around there. Yeah. You have the thing of there's some rushing utility. He's not looking to run, but he will. And he's extremely good in the red zone, I think, as well, which helps with the fantasy stats. But it's weird. His decision-making gets better in the red zone, I feel like, or at least my anecdotal observation. But he also will run into the end zone there because and this is like, I'll delve into my one concern about him in a second off of this. But like his game, he is the stud athlete, and then he's got the ridiculous arm. So he loves to scramble around, allow the receivers extra time, get into the route, break it off, playground ball. We call it. But like when they're in the red zone, he is perfectly happy once, he's drifted out to the right. If that look's not there, I'm taking him myself. So you see him accrue more rushing touchdowns because of that. Obviously will be helpful in the NFL, even if he doesn't rush for as many yards as, for instance, Jaden Daniels will. And then, but going back to the minor concern that I have about him, or if Caleb Williams busts, however people want to define that, it will be because of this and not because of any perceived personality things. I don't play pop psychologist with this stuff. There's no way to know what the kid. Tyrone Matthew coming out had all kinds of character concerns. I think he was a NFL captain for years and years. So I try not to ding people for that. But the thing with Caleb Williams is on field that we're going to have to see, and it is this is the one leap of faith with his evaluation, is that, and obviously the Bears are happy to do it because they're going to pop him. You don't see anticipatory throws on Caleb Williams's film. It was one of two things. Either they would do the quick screen pass to like, facilitate free yards, the efficiency, or it was a scramble around thing. It would extend the play, and he had the super duper long average time to throw. It was 3.44 in 2022 when he won the Heisman. Last year, of course, Justin Fields led the NFL 3.39. Caleb Williams did get it down last year, but he was terrible under pressure last year, whereas he'd been good the year before. In the NFL, you have to do more of the anticipatory throws, and you have to throw over the middle more in conjunction with that so that the defense will respect that, or else they'll say, Caleb, that's fine. We know that you want to extend the plays and then you want to chuck the ball down the field. We're going to spy you, right? And then we're going to keep the safeties back because we know that we don't have to delineate resources to the middle of the field. And now you're going up against better athletes. That's where it could get hairy for him in terms of that. If he does not learn the timing concepts and those anticipatory throws. Again, it's a leap of faith because they didn't have that. That was not a part of USC's offense. You assume that he would be able to do it at least to some degree. But the one question I asked myself about him was the way that they did the offense the last 2.5 years with Lincoln Riley, was that Lincoln Riley saying, Caleb's the best athlete on any field we step onto, and obviously he has this ludicrous arm, and he's super duper creative, with the bullets flying, whatever, and he can hit any target down the field, all three sectors. He's got the vision with that as well. So that's how we'll construct because of that. He has this superpower, and he will play in this super unconventional way. You don't see quarterbacks holding on to the ball that long. Is it that, or was the offense constructed that way because Caleb Williams struggles with the sort of the meat and potatoes stuff of the timing concepts, I'm going to throw it right before the receiver breaks. He's going to go into the route break to stop, cut left, and I need to have that ball out before he cuts. I need to know where he's cutting, the timing that is going to take. And then in your head, modulating that to get the ball, the trajectory right there. So when the dude turns around, it hits him right on the mitt. We just haven't seen that with Caleb Williams. So was that not a function because he can't do it? And so the scrambling was more of a crutch? Or is it just because the scrambling and that sort of play style was the superpower, and Lincoln knew that was the trump card over all these defenses that they were facing? That's my one slight thing with that. But everything else is aces. Obviously, the athletic profile, the arm, the production that we've seen going back multiple years. I'm not as concerned by the under pressure thing as from last year, because he was awesome at that in 2022, or the pressure to sack ratio from last year. That's like the buzzword from this year. I know last season he had the highest in this class, but again, the year before it was way more than good. So to me, that's a bit of a fluke. But to me, that is the one concern is just making sure that he can do the anticipatory throws. But as far as the Chicago situation, you set that up really well. Obviously, super advantageous for a guy to step in. And if they can get the third receiver with that second first round pick, now it's truly on. You have the three amazing receivers. And like you mentioned, you have DeAndre Swift. It's not only a good situation in terms of supporting talent. It appears as though they are explicitly constructing this thing. So it is the Caleb Williams. We're just taking the Caleb Williams show to the NFL. DeAndre Swift, a guy, Caleb Williams can use him as a receiver. And then, of course, the receiving talent that they have, it appears as though that offense is going to lean crazy heavy towards the pass. I mentioned Caleb Williams' prerogative to score touchdowns in the red zone, also throw for them. So, yeah, I'm pretty bullish on him year one. But I did have to mention that one. I don't want to say trepidation, but that one sort of unknowable about his profile that he is going to have to prove at the next level to fully realize what is an enormous ceiling.
It's a full disclosure evaluation, sharing the good, sharing the bad. And I'll say 29 touchdown passes is the record for the Chicago Bears. Caleb's going to get that. I don't know if it's going to be year one or year two, but it could be year one. It's going to be really, really exciting. Thor, let everybody know where they can find your work once again.
Find me on Fantasy Pros in the spring, Betting Pros in the fall. And then you can find me on Twitter at ThorKU.
Awesome. You were super generous with your time. Your takes are awesome. This was a lot of fun. Stick with us at Dynasty Life. We got about 3 weeks left till the real deal. The NFL draft's going to be here. Talk to you guys soon.